Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see the summary of The Quality of Mercy, the trial scene from The Merchant of Venice, Act 4, Scene 1 by William Shakespeare. In Venice, the court convenes for Antonio's trial. The Duke of Venice greets Antonio and expresses pity for him, calling Shylock an inhuman monster who can summon neither pity nor mercy. Antonio says he knows the Duke has done all that he can to lawfully counter Shylock's malicious intentions, and that since nothing else can be done, Antonio will respond to Shylock's rage with a quietness of spirit. The Duke summons Shylock into the courtroom and addresses him, saying that he believes that Shylock means only to frighten Antonio by extending this drama to the brink of performance. No one, the Duke says, believes that Shylock actually means to inflict such a horrible penalty on Antonio, who has already suffered the loss of his ships. Shylock reiterates his intentions and says that should the court deny him his right, the city's very laws and freedoms will be forfeit. Shylock offers no explanation for his insistence other than to say that certain hatreds, like certain passions, are lodged deep within a person's heart. Shylock hates Antony, and for him that is reason enough. Bassanio, who arrived from Belmont, attempts to argue with Shylock, but Antonio tells him that his efforts are for naught. Hatred and predation, Antonio suggests, come as naturally to some men as they do to the wolf. Bassanio offers Shylock 6,000 ducats, twice the amount of the original loan, but Shylock turns down the offer, saying he would not forfeit his bond for 6 times the sum. When the Duke asks Shylock how he expects to receive mercy when he offers none, Shylock replies that he has no need for mercy as he has done nothing wrong. Just as the slave owning Christians of Venice would refuse to set their human property free, Shylock will not relinquish the pound of flesh that belongs to him. The Duke says that he has sent messages to the learned lawyer Dr. Belloro, asking him to come and decide on the matter. News comes that a messenger has arrived from Bellario, and Salarino runs off to fetch him. Meanwhile, Bassanio tries, without much success, to cheer up the despairing Antonio. Nerissa enters disguised as a lawyer's clerk and gives the Duke a letter from Bellario. Shylock whets his knife, anticipating a judgment in his favor, and Gretinio accuses him of having the soul of a wolf. Shylock ignores these slurs and states resolutely, I stand here for law. The Duke alludes to the fact that Bellario's letter mentions a learned young lawyer named Balthazar and orders the disguised Nerissa to admit the young man to the court. The Duke then reads the letter in its entirety. In it, Bellario writes that he is ill and cannot come to court, but that he has sent the learned young Balthazar to judge in his stead. Portia enters, disguised as Balthazar. The Duke greets her and asks whether she is familiar with the circumstances of the case. Portia answers that she knows the case well, and the Duke calls Shylock and Antonio before her. Portia asks Antonio if he admits to owing Shylock money. When Antonio answers yes, Portia concludes that the Jew must be merciful. Shylock asks why he must show mercy, and in one of the play's most famous speeches, Portia responds that the quality of mercy is not strained, but is a blessing to both those who provide and those who receive it, because mercy is an attribute of God. Portia reasons, humans approach the divine when they exercise it. Shylock brushes aside her pretty speech, however, by reiterating his demands for justice and revenge. Portia asks whether Antonio is able to pay the money, and Bassanio offers Shylock twice the sum owed. If need be, Bassanio says he is willing to pay the bond 10 times over or with his own life. Bassanio begs the court to bend the law slightly in order to exonerate Antonio, reasoning that such a small infraction is a little wrong for a great right. Portia replies, however, that the law shall not be broken and decrees of Venice must stand. Shylock joyfully extols Portia's wisdom and gives her the bond for inspection. She looks it over, declares it legal and binding, and bids Shylock to be merciful. Shylock remains deaf to reason, however, and Portia tells Antonio to prepare himself for the knife. She orders Shylock to have a surgeon on hand to prevent the merchant from bleeding to death, but Shylock refuses because the bond stipulates no such safeguard. Antonio bids Bassanio farewell. He asks his friend not to grieve for him and tells Bassanio that he is happy to sacrifice his life if only to prove his love. Both Bassanio and Gretanio say that though they love their wives, they would give them up in order to save Antonio. In a pair of sarcastic asides, Portia and Nerissa mutter that Bassanio's and Gretanio's wives are unlikely to appreciate such sentiments. Shylock is on the verge of cutting into Antonio when Portia suddenly reminds him that the bond stipulates a pound of flesh only and makes no allowances for blood. She urges Shylock to continue collecting his pound of flesh, but reminds him that if a drop of blood is spilled, then he will be guilty of conspiring against the life of a Venetian citizen, and all his lands and goods will be confiscated by the state. Stunned, Shylock hastily backpedals, agreeing to accept 3 times the sum, but Portia is insistent, saying that Shylock must have the pound of flesh or nothing. When Shylock finds out that he cannot even take the original 3,000 ducats in place of the pound of flesh, he drops the case. But Portia stops him, reminding him of the penalty that non-citizens face when they threaten the life of a Venetian. In such a case, Portia states, half of Shylock's property would go to the state, while the other half would go to the offended party, namely Antonio. Portia orders Shylock to beg for the Duke's mercy. The Duke declares that he will show mercy. He spares Shylock's life and demands only a fine rather than half of the Jew's estate. Shylock claims that they may as well take his life as it is worthless without his estate. Antonio offers to return his share of Shylock's estate on the condition that Shylock convert to Christianity and bequeath all his goods to Jessica and Lorenzo upon his death. Shylock consents and departs, saying simply, I am not well. After Shylock leaves, the Duke invites Portia, still in disguise of a young lawyer, to dinner. Portia declines, saying that she must leave immediately to Padua. As she leaves, the Duke tells Antonio to reward the young law clerk, since it was he who saved Antonio's life. Bassanio thanks Portia, though he does not see through her disguise, and offers her the money he brought with him in order to pay off Shylock. Portia declines the gift and says that having delivered Antonio from Shylock's clutches is payment enough. Bassanio insists that she take some token from him, and she eventually agrees. Portia asks Antonio for his gloves and Bassanio for his ring, which she herself gave Bassanio on the condition that he never part with it. Bassanio pulls his hand away, calling the ring a trifle and claiming that he will not dishonor the judge by giving him such a lowly gift. Instead, Bassanio offers to find the most valuable ring in Venice, but Portia remains firm and demands a trifle or nothing. When Bassanio admits that the ring was a gift from his wife, who made him promise never to part with it, Portia claims that the excuse is convenient and used by many men to hold on to possessions they would rather not lose. With that, she takes her leave. Antonio urges Bassanio to let the law clerk have the ring, saying that he should value Antonio's love and the gentleman's worth more than his wife's order. Bassanio gives in and sends Gretanio to run after Portia and present her with a ring. Antonio and Bassanio then leave for Antonio's house to plan their trip to Belmont. And here ends the scene. If you have anything more to add on to what I've said, please write it in the comment box. Like the video, share it with your friends, and if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe and support. Thank you.